Um, okay, so our speaker this morning is our own homegrown Scott, who's going to talk to us a little bit about making wine. And I got to say that I have a whole bunch of your wines in my wine cellar right now under my desk at work. So,
I hope they're not all open.
no. Never. I never. I don't even put a cork in the bottom. I finished it.
So thank you for asking me to speak today. Before I get started, I'm just going to check on the time to make sure I have plenty of time. So we'll be out of here early, no problem. So I entitled this "Living the Dream," because when you're inside a winery at 1 a.m. and you've been working since 6 a.m., the only thing you can think about is, hey, I'm living the dream. That's a common phrase in wineries, especially around harvest time. So just to give a little bit of context, a little bit about the Washington wine industry. The first wine grapes planted in the state were at Fort Vancouver, of all places, in 1825. No one's really sure what varietal they were. They were brought over by people from the Hudson's Bay Company, which ran Fort Vancouver for a period of time. And not really sure, there's some guesses at what they might be, but any of the guesses were not any of the varietals that you might be familiar with today. That's just a little bit of history. So it's interesting that the first wine grapes planted in the state were on the west side of the state, not the east side. Today, there's over 940 licensed wineries in the state. When we got licensed in 2010, we were like number 625 or somewhere around there. So the industry has grown by 50% in about 9 years. We are the second largest wine producing state in the country. Obviously, California's first, and under all metrics and measurements, they are first by a long shot over Washington. And then some other states that are up there in the top 5 are places like New York and Oregon, produce quite a bit of wine. Texas actually is starting to come on with some wine from the western part of the state. 2017, we grew 229,000 tons of grapes. That is not the record for the state. I think the record was 2015 or 2016. Had more tonnage. 43%, so nearly half of the grapes we grow here in the state are Cabernet Sauvignon and Riesling. Cabernet Sauvignon just surpassed Riesling as the #1 grown grape in the state. So that all produces about 17.5 million cases. We produce about 700 cases, to give you an idea of where we are. And what I found really interesting, I've heard a lot of these stats before, but the one I did a little bit digging on, the Chateau Ste. Michelle group of wineries, which is Chateau Ste. Michelle, Red Diamond, 14 Hands, Columbia Crest, those kinds of wineries, all owned by Ste. Michelle. Snoqualmie Winery is also owned by Ste. Michelle. They produce 8 million cases. They produce nearly half of all the cases of wine produced in the state. And they have a similar impact on vineyards in eastern Washington. Michelle, just that's how big they are. We generate $4.8 billion as an industry annually and pay about $62 million in various types of taxes. This map over here is, we call these AVAs, American Viticultural Areas. They're really appellations of origin. And I'll get into a little bit about how you determine which one you're in terms of labeling, but there's, I think, 14 of them right now. There's like 6 more that were applied for through the federal government. But this is a federal designation. So when you see a wine that's labeled Columbia Valley, it can be from anywhere in that area. Okay? If the grapes are coming from outside of Spokane, you can't label it Columbia Valley. You have to be labeled Washington at this point. There's a proposed AVA for Spokane areas. And here's Horse Heaven Hills, here's Walla Walla, here's Red Mountain, here's Yakima Valley, which was actually the first AVA in the state, by the way. So anyway, here's Lake Chelan. So that's, when you look at a bottle of Washington wine, it will have a designation. That tells you where it comes from. So like I said, my winery was founded in 2010, meaning that's when I got licensed. For the first 2 years before that, in 08 and 09, I actually made wine, commercial wine out of Patterson Cellars, which is in Woodinville. And we used their facility, and I helped them out, and they helped me out. And then we leased the space next to them for a couple of years, which was their space, but they subleased it to us. But then that was great because I just paid them a little bit of money to have the privilege of making wine in there. And I was able to spend my money on barrels and equipment and grapes and not have to pay a whole lot of rent until I had something to sell. So we started, as I said, in Woodinville, in the warehouse district. We closed that facility 2017. I almost said last year, 2017, and now we're totally 100% here in North Bend. Like I said, we do about 700 cases a year. Right now I'm producing 6 red wines, 2 white wines, and this spring we'll have 2 rosés. I did my first rosé last year. We've got a second one that we're doing this year. We have no employees, so I can't, say I'm hiring that many people and bringing jobs to the valley, because I'm not. And directly, I have family slaves, kids who I help put through college. It's payback time. My son-in-law is my assistant winemaker, and the rest of the family helps out as they can. And my wife helps out too. So, it's really a family, pretty much a family business. And that's what my labels look like. It's just 4 different wines. C and Z. So, in addition to living the dream, there's lots of phrases in the industry. Another couple of them is it all starts in the vineyard, and the one below that is you can't make a great wine with bad fruit, which I believe is true. If you get really bad grapes, there's no way that you can make that into a good wine. You can get really great fruit, screw it up, and make a bad one. That's not hard to do. So one thing as a winemaker, when I go out to vineyards in the fall, and I'll say I contract for all my fruit, I don't own any vineyards, I don't grow it myself, so I'm working with growers and vineyard managers. I look for 3 things, pretty much. The first thing is called phenolic ripeness. So you may look at a grape, feel a grape, think it's ripe, but really what I'm looking for is what's the flavor of that grape? How balanced is it? So as grapes ripen, more sugar goes into the grape and the acidity drops. So if you taste a grape when it's not ripe, it's very acidic and tart and not very much flavor. So in a perfect world, I want that grape perfect. I want the Cabernet Sauvignon grape to taste like Cabernet Sauvignon. So that's the flavor development piece. I'm also looking at the pH and the total acidity of the grape, and there's ways I can measure that. The problem is, and this is something that we've struggled with over the past few really warm years, if there's too much sugar, sugar turns into alcohol during the fermentation process. So if there's too much sugar, you have higher alcohol wines. But sometimes you need the grape to get riper and hence have more sugar to get the flavor out of it. So a lot of that's just tasting from year to year and adjusting at what sugar level I actually harvest the grapes. I'll talk more about some of the pitfalls here. In the fall, I often say I'm not really a winemaker because that's the easy part. I'm a logistics coordinator. And that's the really tough part. So the first thing is, when are the grapes going to be ripe, like I just talked about. Okay, I out of the vineyard on a Monday, and this past year I started to go out on Mondays just because I thought it gave me the rest of the week to get things to happen. And that worked out pretty well. So I'm out in the vineyard on Monday, tasting through the grapes, bring some samples back, test them, and maybe Monday night I decide, okay, these grapes are just about ready, or maybe they're more than ready. All right, now I got to figure out how I can get those grapes picked. So I contact the vineyard, and the vineyard says, you know, we're full for a week and a half. So there goes my plan to pick the grapes at the perfect time. Or they might say, sure, how about Wednesday? Then the next thing is, how am I going to get the grapes? Now, if I'm hauling a ton of grapes, and that's what you're seeing here, each of these big bins holds about a half a ton, I can put that in my pickup and go over there, pick it up, and bring it back. That's easy. But some vineyards where I get more than a ton, I've got to arrange transportation. So I've got to use a company, it's called Vintners Logistics out of Eastern Washington, that has big semi-trucks, and they'll pick up my grapes and deliver it to me. Or I can go down here to Penske, the storage place, and rent a box truck there. Well, what happens if they don't have any trucks? I mean, there's lots of places I can get trucks. Or what happens if I can't go and Vintners Logistics tells me, I'm sorry, we can pick up on Friday but not on Wednesday. So there's all that logistics. It's much easier now that I'm retired from the day job. When I was doing the day job, it was also trying to juggle my schedule, my work schedule too. Yes?
This question, when you go sample the grapes, they're still on the vine then at that
Yes.
point? And then when you say, okay, this is the grape, do you actually go pick it, or do you tell the farmer or the ranch, whatever, to go start picking your grapes and how much you want?
So the how much I want is something that we agree on earlier in the
Okay.
season. Like usually, I'd say between May and July. So they have to wait till bud break happens and the fruit sets. So they have to wait till there's little grapes growing on there to understand what their crop might look like. But in terms of picking, I tell them the vineyard takes care of it.
They do that part. Okay.
Yeah, I've done it once as part of my one of my classes, and I don't ever want to do it again. I mean, these people who they hire to pick grapes, people, if you go out there and see them work, they're amazing. They're doing a job that most of us wouldn't want to do. It's incredible, and how efficient they are. And then the other thing is, most vineyards have the pickers put their names on there. You can see the duct tape there. So those are the two pickers that pick the grapes that went into the bin. So if I have a problem, if there's a lot of leaves or a lot of stem branches and stuff in there, I can call the vineyard and say, I had a bad batch, and this has only happened to me once. I had a bad batch of grapes. There's a lot of leaves and crap in there that we don't want. I'm paying for that, maybe a little bit. And here's the name of the pickers. So that they can do whatever they need to do.
Sorry, a question. How
Yeah.
many tons of grapes does it take to make 700 cases of wine?
So I'm hesitating because the 700 cases is what I bottled last year. So whenever I talk about cases, there's how much did I bottle versus how much did it actually produce. So I'm going to flip this around and say, last year we got 38 tons, and the wine that we produced in 2018 that's still sitting in tanks and barrels, if I were to bottle that today, I get 1,100 cases. There's a poster I've seen somewhere that will tell you all that information. It's really well done, creative poster, like how many bunches of grapes go into a bottle of wine and stuff like that. So, yes.
Scott, is there a short window of time between when you actually taste the fruit out over there and when you start crushing?
It's all based on logistics.
So, like, do you have a couple of weeks? Do you have?
I've had up to a week and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is, you have to get it pretty soon after.
Yeah, and as I keep doing this, and I find, frankly, some of my wines have got higher alcohol than I wanted. And what I'm finding is I talk to other winemakers, it's this constant struggle between you want the perfect tasting grape, and then you find you can't get it for a week as it continues to ripen. So we do look at the weather. So if it's starting to cool down over there and the grapes aren't going to ripen much, they're pretty safe to leave on the vine for a week. But what I'm going to try to do this fall is actually not go quite for the taste, like get close to where I think they're ready, but be in constant communication with the vineyard. So if they tell me, if I think it's going to be ready in a week, that I can get on their schedule, rather than say, I think they're ready, can I get it picked in 2 days? So, and some vineyards are easier to work with that way. Not easier to work with. Some vineyards have an easier time picking within a day or two of when I request it. So, yeah.
So with 940 wineries, are we, you know, how do you line up? You must have built a relationship with a winery or with a vineyard that that's your go-to, right? But with 940 wineries, do some people kind of lose out because they came to the game late and there's just no more grapes on it at the particular vineyard, or is there competition like that? I mean, Chateau Saint Michel has 8 million of them.
Yeah. The way I look at it, there's always grapes. There's always going to be grapes available. Even toward the end of harvest, I see on different online things on websites that so and so is selling grapes, or maybe the vineyard has processed the grapes and they have finished wine, bulk wine. You can buy and miss out on grapes. There are certain vineyards. I work with Ciel de Cheval Vineyard in Red Mountain, which is one of the top vineyards in the state. I get a few things from them. There's no way in my lifetime I'd ever be able to get Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot from them, just because they've been sold out of that for years by wineries like Cedar Creek and DeLille and Leonetti sometimes gets that fruit. There's no way I'd be able to get that fruit. So I have to look elsewhere for good fruit. So grapes have come in. Now it's time to crush. This is our little crusher destemmer. There are much bigger ones out there. But basically what we're doing is, here's the bin that has the grapes. I've got 2 people up here with these white plastic pitchforks.
Those are your slaves?
Those are my slaves, yeah. This is my son-in-law, and this is our friend John. They created a label under my license called Fly Rod Cellars. They'll show you that at the end, but that's their label. And this is our friend David, who's John's neighbor. That's how John got involved with us. Came out with David once to our winery in Woodinville and was hooked, literally, by the wine bug. So they're pitchforking grapes into here, and then what happens is they'll go down to this hopper, and then there's paddles. It's hard to see, but this is open. There's paddles in here that basically separate the grapes from the stems. And it's not perfect. This is not that kind of machine that's perfect. So I believe that a little bit of stems inside your fermentation adds a little bit more vegetal character, which is what's common for Washington wine. I actually like that character, so it doesn't bother me. The grapes go into this bin. So we have these volunteers that help. And then the other thing we have to worry about during crush is there enough beer? Because another phrase in the wine industry is that it takes a lot of beer to make a great wine. So now the grapes are in the fermentation vat or bin. This is a like 4 foot by 40 inch and about this high plastic, food grade plastic bin. And this is what the grapes look like after they've started to ferment. So what happens is we'll take different measurements and we'll adjust this for acidity. We can add tartaric acid. If the grapes came in too sugary and we think the alcohol is going to be way too high, we can actually do what's called watering back. You hear very many winemakers talk about that, but I think it's important to know. If you add water at this phase before it starts fermenting, you can't tell when you drink the bottle of wine that there's been water. It doesn't taste watered down. It'll be less alcoholic or less alcohol. If you add water after the wine's been made, it will taste watered down. So, and we don't add much, maybe it's 5 to 10 gallons of water. I just use tap water. Some wineries go out and buy jugs and jugs of distilled water, but I found that our water is pretty good here. So the fermentation, we put yeast in. Some wineries do native fermentation, so they just let the grapes essentially spoil on their own. And whatever yeast came in the grapes from the vineyard, or more likely, whatever yeast is floating around in the air of the winery and on the walls of the winery will find its way into these bins and start fermenting the grapes. I like adding yeast because I can have better control. I know what I'm adding, I know what its temperature tolerances are to try to keep it from getting too hot or too cold. I know what character I'm going to get from the grapes. And the yeast produce alcohol, heat, and carbon dioxide, converts sugar into those three things. So this is carbon dioxide bubbling up through here. I didn't get a good picture of this. This is what's called a punch down tool. So what we do, there's a cap that forms on top as the grape skins rise up to the top. And it could be, maybe a foot or so thick. And that traps the heat down below, which is good. It also traps the carbon dioxide, which also helps keep the fermenting wine safe and healthy and not getting oxidized. So what you have to do twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, is you use that tool, which mine has about a 12-inch, 13-inch round plate on the bottom of that thing with some 1 or 2-inch holes in it so the juice can go through. And you literally punch it down in there, and you just get some oxygen in there and get things rolling around, break up the cap. So that's what I've done. That's after I've done it. That's what it looks like. So you see the carbon dioxide. These red grapes will ferment for anywhere from 7 to 10 days. Kind of depends on the varietal. And then my white wines, white wines are not fermented on skins. We press those off, get white grape juice to begin with. And I do those in tanks, big stainless steel tanks that I can chill down. I like to do cool, slow fermentation for my whites. It helps preserve aromas and flavors. And that'll take anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. And I have a lot of control over that. If it's going too fast, I can crank the temperature down and try to keep it going slow. If I want to get done quicker, maybe I need the tank for something else, I can have it ferment more. So now the grapes have fermented. I now have wine. That's the first time under federal law that I have an alcohol product that now has to be reported to the federal government. I don't report it at that time. I'm small enough to do annual reporting. But until I have the finished product, it's not wine. So what we do, this is my little basket, little bladder press. So there's a round screen here you can see with slats in it, or slits in it. What we do is we shovel the grape skins, a lot of manual labor, shovel the grape skins into here. And then there's, it doesn't show, but there's a big metal top that we put on there and ratchet it down. And then what we, whoops. Hitting the wrong button here. There we go. And then right here is where we have a garden hose simply hooked up to this spigot, and we fill the internal rubber bladder with water. And then that expands, and then that's how the grapes get squeezed, basically. I've used air bladders before too, where we have a big air compressor. Does the same thing. Same
So
idea.
you don't have people bare feet in
Yeah.
a pit? No?
You're welcome to do that. It's painful.
No losers.
People who do that, it's like this romantic version of stomping grapes.
Yeah.
It's not fun. No, we don't. We have this instead. Can you still see that, or should we close a couple of the blinds later?
That one lower one, you see this feet there.
So then I'll just keep going while it's happening. So then when this is all done, pull this metal thing off, and what we're left with is all of the squeezed out grape skins. And that's called the cake. And literally, you can take that with your hands and pull off huge chunks of it. That goes into kind of a dump bin, which is right here. And then we rent a small 4 cubic yard dumpster from Cedar Grove Composting, and I just take that bin with my forklift and dump it all in to the compost bin. Gets picked up once a week, and it's gone and used for compost. So now the wine's made, it's in barrel, getting ready to age. It actually, for red wine, goes through second fermentation in the barrel. It's called malolactic fermentation. And what that does is it converts the malic acid in the wine to lactic acid. So malic acid is kind of a sharp acid. It's what you find in a green apple. We'll think about the tartness and sharpness of that. Lactic acid is what you find in dairy products, so a lot smoother, a lot silkier, and what we do is we add a malolactic bacteria, it's called, into each barrel, and that takes, we just let it go at that point. There's nothing more I have to do with it, it just does it. Some wineries just prefer to let it go on its own. I tried that last year with a couple barrels, and they never finished the fermentation, so I'm going to continue adding the bacteria to make it happen. And this is just, without going into a lot of detail, this is what's called paper chromatography. So what happens is I mark down, so this is barrel 46, Cabernet Sauvignon, and I do a little tiny spot of wine from that barrel. I do 9 or 10 barrels per sheet. This goes into like a solvent that wicks up the paper, goes up that way. Take it out, let it dry, and this is what it looks like when it's dry. So this is telling me, this is tartaric acid down here. This is the malic acid in the middle, and this is lactic acid on top. And so what this is showing me is these 4 barrels. So when you see a brighter area here, that's telling me, like, for these 4 barrels, they're not done with the second fermentation because there's still quite a bit of malic acid being picked up. These other ones are done. I consider them done. So the importance of this is once they're done, I can top off the barrel. You have to leave a little space for it to bubble while it's doing this. I can top off the barrel with wine, fill it up to the very top. I can add sulfur dioxide, which you can't have while this is going on, to help protect the wine. I can put a hard bung on the barrel. While this is going through fermentation, there's a different kind of a bung is just something that closes the hole of the barrel. It's usually silicone. But there's 2 types of bungs. One allows carbon dioxide to escape, but is not a tight seal. And then obviously some oxygen can get in. And then one is real tight and doesn't allow oxygen to get in. So you want to get the sulfur dioxide and the tight bung on there as soon as possible. Yes.
The barrels you use, are you getting flavor from the barrels, and then do you have a selection like that?
I think that's on the next slide.
Okay, that's what I was
Go
looking at.
slide after. Yeah. Whites will also go through this malolactic fermentation. My whites,
There's no tastings, you
Riesling, Chenin Blanc, and Pinot Gris, I don't want to go through that fermentation, so I keep them cool and add sulfur dioxide, so it keeps that from happening. So I want the tartness as part of the acidity. Chardonnay is another wine which is kind of interesting. I don't make a Chardonnay, but if you've ever had a buttery Chardonnay, that's the byproduct of this process. They let at least part of the Chardonnay go through this process, and one of the byproducts, hard to taste in red wine, but in white it's really prominent. It's called diacetyl, and that basically gives a Chardonnay its butteriness. You're converting into lactic acid, which is also part of the whole diacetyl chain. So that's where that comes from. So as far as the barrels go, picture some of my barrels. This was actually from a few years ago. The first decision we need to make is, are we going to age in barrels or tanks. I prefer barrels because they evaporate a little bit. Even with the tight bung on there, the wine, the water component of the wine, the liquid, will evaporate through the barrel staves, the sides of the barrels. And that helps concentrate the wine and provides a little bit of oxygen to help it develop and soften. If you tasted a wine when I first put it in the barrel, my wife won't even taste it. And I even still am amazed at how magical it is that this really bad tasting stuff can end up really good wine. But this is an important part of the process, this what I call micro-oxidation that happens in the barrels. Another decision that you make is what type of barrel. Where's it, what kind of forest is it coming from? French, American oak, French oak, American oak, Hungarian oak, Russian oak, all these different oaks that it can come from. I haven't experimented with Hungarian, Romanian, or Russian. I use it mostly French and American. They're all French and American. Then the next question is it a new barrel, is it a neutral barrel, or is it recooper? So a new barrel is just that. You order a barrel, comes, smells great, it's brand new, never been used before. New French oak barrel is about $1,200. A neutral barrel is what I mostly use, and that's the oakiness that's provided in a barrel. So what you were talking about, does it get the flavor of the barrel? Goes away after maybe a couple of years. It starts to diminish. I mean, it's like the value of a new car you drive off the lot. The minute you put something in there, it starts diminishing. So I use a lot of neutral barrels because I don't like a lot of oak in my wine. Some is needed for flavor development and balance, but I don't like it. I have barrels that I purchased in 2009 that I'm still using. So I usually get that question, how long does a barrel last? Well, as long as I want it to last, unless it gets damaged or starts leaking or something bad happens while the barrel's empty. You put sulfur dioxide in there to keep microbes from forming and bad microbes, but sometimes it gets rancid. You don't want to use it. That's when you have your barrels and oak barrel tables. And then there's a new thing that's started to occur, and that's recooper barrels. So basically, it's a company in Oregon that I use called Rewind Barrels. I can send this barrel down to them. They'll pop, this is called the head of the barrel. The ends are called the heads. They'll pop off the heads. They'll remove these hoops, pop off the heads. They will refinish the inside of the barrel and the head inside of the heads, and they'll re-toast it. All these barrels have a toast level, so there's a hot fire that basically caramelizes, if you will, the wood inside to give it a certain taste and flavor. They'll re-toast it, put it back together, and bring it back up to me. Costs me about $300 per barrel to do that if I'm sending my barrel down. If I have to buy the barrel from them, it's a little bit more.
And what's the neutral barrel cost? The one in the middle?
Neutral barrel, I paid anywhere from $75 to $150. But I know enough wineries in the area that take really good care of their barrels. So I have no problem buying barrels from them. And in summer I'll look and plan how much wine I'm going to be making in the fall, look at how many barrels I have, and say, I need 6 more neutral barrels. So I'll contact those wineries I bought barrels from before, ask if they're going to have any for sale. Most of the time they will. And then most wineries, the red wine will remain for 20 months or more in barrel. Okay.
Scott?
Yes.
The date on the bottle, the year it's bottled?
No, it's the year that the grapes were harvested. Yeah. So I mentioned testing before. This is older picture of my setup when I would have my equipment in my workroom in the garage. You have all the nails and screws and stuff like that. But this is a pH meter, so I'm testing the pH of this wine right here. This is a white wine of some kind. that I was working on. And then this thing is a device for adding hydrogen sulfide. I was either sodium hydroxide, sorry. I was either testing for carbon dioxide or for toxicity. But there's some of the science involved, and it's fairly simple stuff. You just have to make sure you know how to calibrate things and read the false readings. So the wine's in barrels, getting ready to bottle. So we do blending trials. So what we do is we siphon out a sample bottle from each barrel that we're proposing to bottle and mark them. So there's 1 year is what we did. We'll then taste each of those, make notes on each of those barrels. Which one's oaky, which one's more acidic, which one's got a real fruity flavor, which one's kind of flat, which one has a great finish. And then we'll start with one wine, and it's usually my Stormfront red blend we start with. It's Merlot dominant. So we already know that most, if not all, the Merlots go in that wine. So now let's try to add other stuff to that to give it the flavor and the character that we like. So that's how we do it.
So when you make a blend, that's when you blend the wines, not
Yeah.
the grapes.
Right. Right, yeah. Every so often during fermentation, we'll end up with, so barrels are about 59 gallons, but we end up with, 13 gallons left over from Merlot that we can't fit in the barrel, right? So we have too much to fit in full barrels. So we might create a few blended barrels along the way, but we also consider that as part of this. We keep changing and revisiting, so we say, okay, hey, these 6 barrels are great for Stormfront. Let's assume we're going to do that. Let's move on to the next wine. But we'll pull something out of the Stormfront lineup of barrels, move to something else if we feel we need to, and then go back and revisit Stormfront. So it's probably about a 3-hour of tasting different things.
So after you sample a number of barrels, doesn't your palate become a little less?
Absolutely, you gotta be really careful. Because it's just, even though we're spinning, we're not really swallowing the wine. I did have a relative once who was helping us, said, this is too good, I'm just gonna swallow it. By the end of the night, they were asleep on the couch. It's like, okay, fine.
That'd be Steve.
Yeah, you gotta be really careful about that. So we have neutral crackers, and we'll take a break partway through, and then we go back and revisit things. And, yeah.
You ever do a non-blended, just a barrel finish, just like
A what?
just basically just like this is how it came out of the barrel and just bottle it just
Yes.
as it came out?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we're gonna be doing that with Cabernet Franc this year. And I did that with a Malbec a couple of years ago. We had a single barrel Malbec. that we did. Yeah.
So the things that you put in there are other wines, that correct?
Yeah,
That's how you get the different flavors.
that's how we get the different flavors, yeah. And I try to keep it in whole barrel increments, so that I'm not taking like, 13% of one barrel. I don't have an easy way to measure that. And it becomes important when I do my labeling, because I put that information on the label usually. And if I get audited by the federal TTB, Tobacco and Trade Bureau, which has happened to me twice, I have to prove to them that those numbers are accurate. So, yes.
So is it hard to keep a consistent flavor from one year to the next, you gotta label it?
Yeah, it can be. I let taste and smell of the wine dictate everything. All my wines have a different theme to them. So Stormfront is always Merlot dominant. Mistral is always Grenache dominant. But it may vary year to year, just depending on what I have and what it tastes like. No, and that's what makes a small winery different from a large winery. Saint Michelle, if they're going to be producing their Cabernet Sauvignon, one of their red blends, it's probably going to be the same year after year after year after year. And there's, you know, yeah, consistency is great, but I want to make a great wine rather than force the consistency, even though I don't. Well, we always try to start with what did we do last year? Or I've made this wine for 8 years. What was the best one we made? So we do both of those tests. And what was the blend on the best one that we made? Now the vineyards may have changed. I may have gone to different vineyards. So that has something to do with it also. Yes?
So with it changing every year, I guess my question would be is when you see the bottles on the shelf and it says, you know, award-winning wine or whatever on the bottle, if it's the same company and they label the wine the same name, are they allowed to carry that from year to year?
The award-winning
Yeah,
part?
because it's probably a different wine, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't put awards like that on my bottles. I'm trying to think, I don't think there's a there's a lot of federal regulations about bottling and your labeling, but I don't think that's one of them, so they might be able to say that.
So if they want it back in 2001, they can just keep slapping that on there
I think so.
forever.
King of Beer has been the king of beer for forever.
Well, and part of it is when you get ready to bottle, you may not have known that you may not have submitted your wine anywhere for awards yet.
Right.
Because they almost always require the wine to have a label on it and everything. So you can't just submit a sample, is what I'm saying.
I just got to say this out of respect for everybody's time. I just want to give people a heads up. It's 8:15, but based on the topic, I don't think we're going to lose too many people.
I'm almost done.
No,
Take a couple more slides. So now that we physically blend our wines into the barrels a couple of months or so before bottling. I like to do that because it gives us an opportunity to taste it after it's been in the barrel for a month or so and it's been all kind of integrated, to see if there's any other adjustments. We might taste it and say, boy, this doesn't taste very good. What do we need to do? That's never happened, but it gives us I've heard horror stories of wineries basically blending the day before they bottle, and things don't get mixed up enough, and that's where you get really horrible bottle variation. So for bottling, again, it's more of a logistics nightmare. So this is what I'm doing now, is preparing for bottling February 22nd. So I have to think about the bottles. My bottles are screen printed, so I've got to get those done in advance. So we have to still do labels, but they're screen printed, so label information changes. I have to order corks or screw caps, capsules, the things that fit over the corks. As I mentioned, labels. Then when we get ready to bottle, what wine's going to be filtered and what kind of filtering are we doing on those wines? It's another question we think about. Who's going to bottle for me? I don't have bottling equipment. So in the past, we rented the bottling truck. A bottling truck is a 53-foot semi, comes into my driveway. Everything's inside of it. They take care of it all. This year we're using another winery's equipment, and they're coming out and doing the bottling for us. But it's the same idea, but it's going to be inside the winery instead of in the truck. When I rent the truck, when I use the truck, I have to rent a generator because they require 3-phase power. I have single phase. And then we bottle with nitrogen, so nitrogen goes in the bottle first. It's heavier than air, pushes all the oxygen out. The wine gets filled up in the bottle, and so that little headspace you have in a bottle is usually nitrogen. It's not like air we're moving. And now I need volunteers for bottling. I've got to get all that together in order to have a successful bottling. And that's the rosé we bottled last year.
Do you have a hard time getting volunteers for this?
No, not at all.
Okay. I was going to say, it might be a fun project sometime if you ever need anybody to put the word out.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point where I have kind of a core group of bottling volunteers because these people have done it for me before.
Okay.
And they kind of know. I don't have to re-explain how you do something. So it's a lot easier for me. I used to start by having different people each time, and it was just a lot of extra work for me. But everybody's welcome to come by and watch.
I've
Maybe.
done some bottling in Walla Walla.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to experience purgatory,
It's really,
go for it.
Yeah.
It's just the most,
Yeah.
I was doing the foil caps,
Oh, yeah.
and it was just so, like, the most boring 8 hours of my life, and the only fun I had is when I missed one, and I'd reach into the machine to get it back,
Yeah.
and everything went falling over, and, you know, yeah.
Yeah.
You had Steve at beer.
So in terms of my sales, I'm often asked this question. This is not based on a recent look at QuickBooks, but basically I sell about 70% of my wine through my tasting room here in North Bend or through my wine club. About 25% wholesale, so to grocery stores. I do have 2 of my wines in Costco, that's what you're seeing here. And then about 5% through events like the Enumclaw Chocolate and Wine Festival coming up this weekend in Hint. And other the downtown Snoqualmie wine walks and North Bend wine walks, those kinds of things. About 5%. I think maybe that's a little bit higher, and maybe the wholesale's gone up a little bit too. But this is the only family member that's not here is my wife. She wasn't there, but there's me with my 2 wines at Costco, and there's my assistant winemaker there, Troy, my son, my daughter, 2 grandchildren. No, they're 6 months apart. They're going to be 4 this year. So one of the direct-to-consumer things is shipping wine, and shipping wine is a real nightmare. So the states that are kind of outlined in this reddish purple, and I think Delaware might be up here too, are felony states. I would be committing a felony if I shipped a case of wine to Oklahoma. So I am not shipping wine to Oklahoma. You as a consumer, it's illegal for you to ship wine anywhere in the United States. You have to be a licensed bonded winery with an agreement with FedEx or UPS or both to be able to ship wine. The way each state has their own licensing process and fees and rules. There's a number of third-party companies out there dealing with wine shipping. I use Vino Shipper. So you can go on my website, buy a bottle of wine, and ship to, I think, just about every state in blue here. And Vino Shipper takes care of all the paperwork, all the taxes. I just pay them a percentage. But for the small amount I do, this is so much easier. I'm dropping my licenses. I'm dropping New York this year. I'm dropping North Carolina. I have it in about 8 or 10 different states. This is so much easier for the amount I do to have them do it. The other thing we have to concern ourselves with is weather. We don't want to ship when it's too hot, and we don't want to ship when it's too cold. So luckily I wasn't shipping anything to the Midwest this week because the wine would probably freeze. I did hear that they're not doing beer deliveries in the Midwest because the beer will freeze in the trucks. It's that cold.
Stuck at home and no beer.
Yeah.
Horrible.
For licensing to have a winery, we have to be licensed with the federal TTB, the State Liquor and Cannabis Board. City or county licensing, King County doesn't require any specific license for me to operate. But when I was in the city of Woodinville, I had to have a city license. And then the health department gets involved because a few years ago they said just the act of washing wine glasses at our sink or in a dishwasher, they treated us all like restaurants. So we basically had to meet much of the same requirements a restaurant would have.
are you King County or North Bend?
King County.
York, okay, so across the street is North Bend.
So we get around the health department by giving away glasses. They're these kind of plastic, high-end plastic glasses. And it's probably over time more expensive than getting the county health department license and renewing it every year. But at least, I don't have to deal with health department inspections, and not that I'm doing anything wrong.
And it's branding.
You just never know.
Branding.
Branding, yeah. So I think this is my last slide. This is talked about labeling, some of the rules. So this is my main label's convergence zone. We created a second label called Three Forks. Anyone guess what that's after?
Yeah.
The Three Forks of the Snoqualmie River. Oh wait, and the Three Forks you find at a formal dinner. So we like double meanings. And then this is the most recent fly rod.
I just opened that earlier this week.
Yeah.
That
This one?
fly rod's really good.
Yeah, it's gone. It's sold out. So.
It's gone in my house too.
Yeah.
Red.
Yeah, this was a Cabernet Franc. And so these are the only paper labels I use. Everything else is screen printed. So the rules for labeling. So in order to say like Cabernet Sauvignon on a bottle of wine, 75% of what went in there has to be Cabernet Sauvignon. If you have 74%, you can't say Cabernet Sauvignon. It has to be at least 75%. To be able to say, so this one, I'll use this example. This was my Pinot Gris Rosé. It's 100%, so I had no problem there. For whatever's listed for the AVA, that map I showed you, 85% of what's in the bottle has to come from that single AVA. So wines that are labeled Columbia Valley might have, 80% Red Mountain fruiting. I have one that's like that. I don't have 85, I have 80, so I have to say Columbia Valley. To list a vineyard, 95% of the grapes in that bottle have to be from the vineyard, and same with the vintage. So if you see a wine labeled NV or non-vintage, there's nothing wrong with that wine. It's just I have one that's going to come out later this year. This non-vintage because I had 7% from the 2014 vintage going into a 2015 wine. I had too much, and that's topping wine used to keep the barrels full. Oh yes, and I found on my very first, the federal government has to approve these labels. So when the government was shut down, that's why you might have read that breweries, focus on breweries, couldn't get their new beers bottled because the federal government was shut down, they couldn't get their labels approved. I learned through my very first label approval, you can't say the word bold on a label because it connotates high alcohol. So that word is rejected by the federal government. And then the final thing is to just, now you know how the bottle of wine's made, just relax and enjoy it. Different shots here is some of our favorite things.
For those of you who haven't discussed tasting room, it's fun because you're surrounded with all of this. You see everything you saw in the pictures, except for the bottling truck and things like that. You're surrounded. I'm fascinated with the white pitchforks on the wall, things like that. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, the first time I went there, I met Scott when I was looking for wine for my daughter's wedding. So I was talking about all the summits, and we wound up buying 2 cases coming right.
And then this middle picture here, that's what it looks like inside. We had a holiday party in there, so.
You ever figure out what the cost is just to make one bottle of wine?
Yeah. Yeah, because when I do my taxes, I have to come up with the cost of goods. So it can vary quite widely. For small production, it can be anywhere from $6 to $12, and that's the cost of the grapes. The cost it's mostly the cost of the packaging, the bottles, the corks, the bottling truck, all that. What I can't include is, even since I own my own crusher, distiller, and press, I cannot include the cost of that. So when I was paying somebody to do that work for me on their equipment, I could include that. Now I can't.
So not depreciation?
Well, that's different. But this is just in the cost of goods.
Hey Scott, screw top versus cork, that controversy. What has technology changed where it isn't as big a deal anymore?
Yeah, I think so. One of the wines, the single barrel Malbec I did was under screw top. I was experimenting with it. My whites and rosés are now all screw top.
Yeah.
That's what you typically find. I think there's a consumer issue here. If I were to sell you a $32 bottle of wine with a screw top, that might not sell very well.
Yeah.
There's a winery in Oregon that makes really good Cabernet Sauvignon. A lot of the grapes, same grapes I buy from the same vineyard. And they put their $26 bottle of Cabernet under a screw top and it sells very quickly at Costco. So
Scott, I know that Tom, the developer, was looking at a major wine production kind of, is that still moving forward or?
As far as I know,
Okay.
I think they, last I heard, they were in the environmental impact statement phase of it.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, that's gonna be a game changer if that actually happens.
Okay. Very
I am
cool.
thinking,
I say we do Rotary there one of these days.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was
Join
saying.
the Sip Fest committee, that's where we're meeting.
No, the idea of having a Rotary event there sometime would be fun.
It'd
Awesome.
be really fun.
Yeah, and I encourage anybody who hasn't joined this wine club,
Yeah.
it's
you
awesome.
started in 2010,
Yes.
but you've put in a hell of a lot of work since then, figuring everything out and doing everything. And, well, I guess you've done a good job. But the first few years, wasn't it very discouraging trying to get everything all organized?
I wouldn't say so, because I was really excited about starting, and the fact that
And
the
you
first
hadn't
couple
got
of
a job
years
at
I
the
didn't
same
have to pay, I didn't have to worry about paying rent. You know, and I started really small. When we finally opened and started doing tastings in 2010, we sold out of our single red wine very quickly, because, you know, we were the new kid on the block, literally, and everybody, we had a lot of attention. And we sold out. I remember we had our tasting room closed for like 4 weeks in September, maybe September, October, because we had no wine to sell. Nothing that we were ready to sell. I mean, we had stuff in bottle, but we didn't want to sell it. So we just closed.
Well, Scott, thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.